Hello again, Steve here with a little bit of a commentary on the differences between self-help and victim mentality. Now, that might sound like a strange topic, but I think it's important, and hopefully, with what I have to babble about here today, will be helpful in explaining that. Now, I was listening to a video a couple of days ago. It was an interview between Stefan Molyneux and this lady, Casey J. I'd never heard of her before. She was a film producer who produced a movie apparently called The Red Pill, which I haven't watched, so I don't want to make a comment on that, but just to give some context as to who this was. And she had wanted to talk to Stefan Molyneux about what he thought about identity politics. And I thought it was a great conversation. But one of the things that came up in that conversation just had to do with self-help. She had made the comment that something about self-help, the self-help books, the self-help industry, whatever, that it had a bad connotation. That's what she said. She wanted to preface. It was almost like she was nervous about talking about self-help. And Stefan Molyneux, in his humorous way, he basically said, I got a confession to make. He said, I had my chicken soup for the soul phase in my life as well. And a lot of people have who wanted to self-discover and so on. They go through the self-help phase and continue, I would say. I certainly continue with it. In fact, I even know somebody who contributes to the Chicken Soup for the Soul series, and a very positive person, a very accomplished person in her own right. Now, so basically, I think the reason why this lady she used the term bad connotation, she approached the self-help thing with a bit of trepidation. I think it's because it's a little bit like, depending on, you got to walk, some people think anyways, unless you don't care anymore, it's like, so what? But some people will walk with a little bit of soft feet around people who they don't want to offend, right? It's like how people will not want to mention anything about Trump around so many people because there's so many people who are offended by him. There's a whole, offense industry almost. I would call it the victim mentality. And they don't seem to like self-help because I think deep down inside they know it's right. They know a lot of this stuff is right. And they just hate to see the success of others, so they want to denigrate the idea of power of positive thinking and so on. This is one of the reasons why Trump is hated so much. I mean, he's a white male who's wildly successful. I mean, this is the epitome of self-help, right? And actually, there was an interesting saying that Stefan had made up, or that Stefan came up with in this video, which was that he made the comment that probably the only, white male privilege that there is that we're not given any excuses, right? In identity politics, of course, is where people want to grab onto the power of the state to forward their supposed, fantasy called a group. You know, in that politics, women, the tagline is a lot of it is, hey, there's a pay gap, right? And for blacks, it might be slavery, right? And for lots of immigrants, it's racism, right? And all of those groups, okay, you're oppressed by the big, dirty white male, right? The white male has enslaved you. The white male has created that pay gap. The white male is the racist, the only one who can be racist, right? But the white male is not afforded any of those privileges, those victim mentality categories, right? And maybe that is our privilege, is that we're not given any excuses by anybody. And therefore that's a privilege, in a way, you could say. But it's probably the only one, The other thing I wanted to mention too is this victim mentality is pervasive, and it's sometimes hard to see. For example, there's a great song. I love the song actually. It's called "Sonnys Dream." It's by a Newfoundlander called Ron Hines, I believe his name is, and you could say that it is an East Coast, East Coast anthem for the eastern Canadian provinces, you might say. Everybody down there knows it, and they know a few lines. Sonny, don't go away, I am here all alone. I mean, I grew up in the Maritimes. I know a few lines of it, but I don't know all the lines. But there's an interesting a section in there where it's basically the mother singing to this young guy who she doesn't want him to go away because his daddy's always gone. Her husband's always gone because he's out fishing, right? He's gone for a long time, and she feels very vulnerable, and she wants to hang on to this son, right? But the son wants to go away. He's got dreams. And you can see the put downs, and this is a human nature of not wanting somebody else to succeed when we rely on their compliance to our sort of our perceived state of affairs, our state of affairs that we can't do anything about in a way, right? So she says that Sonny's dreams can't be real. They're just stories in his head. Stars in his eyes, yes, they're dreams in his head. And he's hungry inside for the wild world outside. And I know I can't hold him, though I've tried, and I've tried, and I've tried, right? If you think about that, it's kind of the antithesis to self-help. Those are just dreams in your head, man. Forget about it. Forget about it. They're just dreams in your head. And I would say, having lived over in the East and having lived out West, it is a bit of a maritime anthem, right? I noticed that. When I mentioned self-help down there. There's a bit of a mocking sneer. It's like, yeah, it's all just dreams in your head, Steve. It's all kind of BS. And it's very British in a way. It's like, let's just suffer it in silence, man. Shut up, don't tell anything about that. Whereas the West, the prairies especially, Alberta and even BC, this area was populated by mostly Americans, at least, and very influenced by the Americans. And the Americans are very much the other way. Americans are very self-help. I just love it in a way. In so many ways, it's very positive and very sort of anti-communist, which is what victim mentality is at its fruition, right? Because the communists, of course, they've always wanted to create class conflict as a tactic, and they use victimhood. So you are oppressed because of whatever, by the wealthy classes or whatever, and it just morphs over time, because once people realize that this was a lie, right, that the rich people have put you down, but yet at the same time, where there's rich people, that's where the poor are raised up. So that didn't work anymore. So now it has to be sexism. You're held down. Your pay gap is because you're a woman. It's got nothing to do with any of your actions. It has to do with those people over there who are keeping you down. And you as a black, you're kept down because you're black, because you used to be a slave and you're still a slave, but it's just that you don't call it that anymore, right? And you new immigrants, you are kept down because people are racist towards you, right? And yeah, it's I actually have a friend of mine who I've had conversations about this for the longest time, and he tends to slant on the side of the victim mentality. He exists in that victim mentality. At least that's my impression. And really poo-poos things like multi-level marketing and certain types of self-help and whatever, because multi-level marketing is largely self-help. That's the basis of it, as an example. And I've talked with him, and I appreciate the conversations. It helps me to collect my thoughts and to get straight on my thinking on this. And what I realized at a certain point is, you know what? In all of our lives, there are things that we can control, and there's things that we can't control. I've tried to get used to saying, so what, to the things I can't control, right? For example, there are guys who are taller than me. I would like to be taller sometimes. Sure, like maybe I could get leg extensions. I don't know. That'd be a lot of, that'd be a huge cost-benefit analysis I'd have to sell myself on to get to that point. But I'd like to be taller at times, right? I would like to, there's other things, I suppose. I'd like to be younger right now, maybe. But am I going to be younger? So there's many things. And even if it's true that certain people certain races, certain sexes, and so on, if it even is true that there's certain disadvantages in being that, then if you look on the other side, sure, there's certain advantages to it, and they kind of weigh out. But even if you're looking at the advantages, but something are disadvantages, and it's something that's inherent. Like I'm looking at myself saying, I wish I could be taller, but that's inherent. My height is inherent. I didn't choose to be this height, in other words, right? Well, what am I going to do about it? I could moan and complain and get into a victim mentality. Or I could look over at the self-help and see what the controllables look at the controllables that I have in my life and work with those. And maybe they're not 50-50, controllables, uncontrollables. I don't know. But I just try to categorize things in my life as controllables or uncontrollables and focus on the controllables. And that way I would fall into the self-help side of things and forget about the victim mentality. Here's the thing that I realize, and it's a pretty obvious thing. At the end of this game, I'm going to end up either in an ash urn or a wooden box somewhere. That's the end game. So in the meantime, the precious time that I have, I'm going to focus on things that I can affect in the world, rather than moaning and dripping about feeling somehow victimized, right? The other thing too is that in terms of the functionality of it, if you look at the history of it, this victim card shit, it leads to stuff like socialism and communism, because it has a terrible, terrible track record, disastrous track record, and a body count into the millions of people behind it. Whereas the self-help leads to greater happiness, greater fulfillment, greater capacity to engage the possibilities and work on ourselves, right? Because if we're stuck in a victim mentality and we're blaming others, how much work are we doing on ourselves? And sure, it might be the other. It might be the other. But how much harder is it to fix somebody else as opposed to fix ourselves? Very difficult to get anybody else to change. Sure, it might be difficult to get ourselves to change, but this is the only real person that we can change, is looking in the mirror, right? And yeah, so I think this bad connotation that this Casey brought up is just a mirror that she's hearing around, because she probably hangs out with a lot of socialists. And of course, she said she was a feminist for years, so she would have been involved in this socialist mentality, this collectivist victim mentality for many, many years. And she would have seen the sneers and she would have felt them. So she's cautious about saying it, right? But this is, in terms of quality of life and true fulfillment, true happiness comes from developing ourselves rather than trying to fix the world first and get everything to conform to us. That's a hell of a job, man. That is an exercise in frustration, because it's really effectively can't be done. The only real world that we can change is ourselves. We can begin eating better. We can begin exercising. We can begin reading interesting information, hanging out with people who are positive, who are on a growth trajectory themselves, and hopefully at a level that's actually higher than us in terms of growth, so we can catch up and learn. And, not necessarily just being positive for the sake of being positive, but begin trying to look at things in terms of where's the silver lining. All of these exercises, they involve looking at things that we can control in our lives. We can control our diet to a great extent. We can control our activities to a great extent. We control who we hang out with. We can control what we read. You see, all of these things we can control. But whether somebody else is mean to us, or is trying to insult us, or our physical height, or our sex, or the color of our skin, and all that sort of stuff, we don't have much control over, man. We're just dropped into this game as it is. And to focus on that takes away our energy and our possibility to focus on the other things that we can control. So I would say, when I compare self-help to victimhood, man, I'm going to choose self-help every time. Steve here again. Great chatting. Talk again soon. Bye for now.